What's good, guys? It's your boy Beats by Ash coming at you with the Table 1 Podcast, Episode 2, and I'm here with Lilindigo, and we're going to be bringing you guys the definitive tier list for every leader in the game that can be used at the upcoming Treasure Cup event. Go ahead and introduce yourself, man.
What's up, guys? It's Lilindigo. Follow me on Instagram at indie.wave and YouTube at Lilindigo. I basically make beats. All the videos you've seen by him, you'll notice the beats in the background. It's all me. So, yeah.
Yes, sir. That's very much appreciated on the channel. I'm going to be a regular on this series as well in upcoming videos once we get things going. I'm just going to keep getting better from here. And he's been playing the game, pretty much as consistently as me. In our area, we have about, I would say, 7 different tournaments per week. And we go to a bunch of different stores, so we get to be around a bunch of different decks, a bunch of different communities of people who have different styles, and I think we have a lot to bring into the table in this area. We both come from Yu-Gi-Oh! We won the 2v2 event at Nats, first place 2v2 national champions in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yes, sir.
So we're just going to go ahead and get right into it. I'm going to go ahead and explain the tiers for everyone because I kind of just labeled them in a way for us to understand, and it's better if I just talk about them to you guys because I don't want to fill up the boxes with too much text.
Anybody who really hasn't been to a major tournament or anything, there's some terms that you might need explained for you. So
first off, I want to put out there that this event will have 2 days. The first day will be Swiss, all best of 1, and then the second day will cut to top cut at some point. I believe it goes top 128, then to 64, 32, and so on. And I think once you get up high enough in the top cut, it eventually goes into best 2 out of 3. Now, I'm not 100% sure on that. But I know it has been like that in some other events, so I'm just going to assume that's how it's going to be. So essentially, we have the top tier. The top tier could win. That means that I feel like it probably is going to win, or it's going to be in the finals. It has a good chance to win.
Potential to take the whole thing, really.
Yep, take the whole thing. And then we've got the next tier, which is it will take multiple spots in top cut. And by that, I'm kind of just talking about top 16. I'm talking about if it's not top 16, it took up at least, maybe 5 or 6 slots in top 32. But predominantly, it's going to take up, quite a few spots in the top 16 as well. And then in the third category, we have can reach top cut / is a good pilot. This means I'm not going to be surprised if you did make it into the top cut. If you did reach that additional prizing point, if you got top 32, you slipped in, you've got 1 or 2 copies of that deck running around. But these are also decks that I wouldn't say you have the most likely chance to get to the finals. But if you do get as far as, top 16, top 32, it's probably because you're a master of that deck and you are kind of just showing more skill expression than other people who potentially tried the deck.
Yeah.
And then at the bottom, we have X True Drop. This just means you're probably not going to make day 2. If you do make day 2, you're just a meme god, and shout out to you. I hope you enjoyed the prizing for top 128 because you're not making it past any farther than that, buddy.
Yeah.
Technically, you can't win the tournament. Maybe you could stop someone else from winning. Maybe that gives you some gratification. But that's all it's going to be for the tiers, and that bottom tier is just all the leaders that are showcased in the tier list maker from set 2, because we're not going to be talking about those, so just disregard that pile at the bottom, and let's go ahead and get right into it. We're going to go ahead and go in ascending order of how they're lined up on the tier list maker, and Lilindigo is going to be managing the mouse here, so go ahead and keep up with that on the screen. And first off, we are going to be talking about Zoro.
All right, so when we first started this game or playing this game, I was the Zoro main. I will say that Zoro, I would win some matchups I didn't expect to win when I thought I for sure lost, mainly because of one card in that deck, the Diable Jambe, I believe you call it. That I would say is crazy, but overall, I think Zoro is just kind of like mediocre. Not. I don't think it could win. Is basically what I'm saying.
So the thing about Zoro is we've seen the evolution of the deck change over the course of the meta. I feel like, at least in our area, at the beginning of the set release, that Zoro was the most popular leader. Pretty much everybody gravitated towards him, whether that be just because he's a fan favorite or because everyone initially felt like the deck was easy to play.
Very easy, yeah.
But over time, I think that it started feeling a little bit less powerful, for the reason being that people started understanding how to play around some of the trigger effects. And some of the event counters, because the event counters and their trigger effects are pretty polarizing. And then later in the meta, we ended up getting a higher peak of the deck with the release of the promo pack, the Uta promo pack that comes from the movie. Now, I think once you add those cards, it probably goes into, you know, the higher tier categories. I've seen people do really well versus it, you know, but it's very similar to the Luffy strategy. And I think that if you don't have experience playing with the Uta promo pack, that's definitely something I would focus on in preparation for this event, because those cards are very game breaking. And I think it really changes the play style of the deck from being more of an aggro deck into that more mid-range archetype. Because, you know, when we think about red, it's like, one of the most powerful cards in red is Nico Robin. That's been the sole point of most mono red decks. And with Nico Robin, we have the addition in the promo pack of the 4-cost Law, which is essentially 4 more copies of Otama if you choose to do so. And then we have Beppo, which is essentially a worse version of Nico Robin. And that card isn't like insane, but in the matchups where Nico Robin is good, it gives you more access to it, and it's a 2K, so sometimes it does more than you would think. And I think those cards have just really elevated the ceiling of the deck, because that Nico Robin effect is very strong versus green, and I think that green is going to be the highest representation. So as long as you're not metagaming that purple is going to be in the mix, I would say that it's going to take multiple spots in the top cut, but I think that eventually you're going to go against someone like a Kaido, or someone just like with more of like a higher end curve, that you're probably going to get unlucky with, you know, the angle of your deck, because there's only like, you can only commit to one aspect of the game. We're kind of in a rock, paper, scissors format, and I just don't think you can cover all of the matchups with this leader. And personally, I just prefer Luffy. So I would have to put it in the top of will take multiple spots, because, you know, you can do good with it. And it's good against majority of the matchups, but it doesn't cover the entire board. And that's why I don't feel like, you know, it's going to get there.
Yeah, and again, there's going to be a lot of people playing Zoro, so expect that. And like he said, like once they introduced the film pack, it definitely changed the deck a little bit, because they got really used to what your game plan was with Zoro, and they knew what you were trying to do. They knew what to think about. Okay, he has this many cards left. Does he have the Luffy? Does he have the Zoro? Does he have the Diable Jambe? But yeah, I agree with that. I'll say, yeah, I can see it taking to multiple spots, but if they go in against that Kaido multiple times, they're going to have a hard time.
Yeah, and especially if it's a best 2 out of 3 in Top Cut, because then Kaido becomes quite a bit stronger, because you do have more chances to draw the island. And that's one of the main reasons why I don't know that it can get to the end, because in some of these bigger tournaments we've seen, like in the PPG, for example, I don't believe it was top 128 plays out to top cut. I think it started at like top 32 top cut or something to that extent. Don't quote me on that, but it wasn't going to be as large scale. This is going to be the largest we've seen. And so you could require a bit less variance in those type of events. But now let's go ahead and talk about Law. Honestly, I have to say that Law could very easily win the deck. I think that the best thing about Law is that it's one of the decks that you have the most room to play around with what build you want to go with. Personally, I've been playing around with a Control Law, if you will call it, which focuses around the 8-drop kid, kind of just playing for value because the green cards essentially just give you the most value out of any other color in terms of tempo, in terms of how much advantage they give you on play. And this leader just allows you to add in the cards that overlap in the supernova archetype they're able to be searched off of Bonnie. And personally, I think that Bonnie, if you don't think it's the best card in the game, it is one of the best cards. And I think that anything that can play Bonnie has a chance to win for that reason, because in my opinion, searchers are the most unfair thing in the game, and I think it's what's stopping blue and purple from being more consistent than they are, because there's no shuffling in this game, and that's something I don't see a lot of people talk about, because regardless of whether you hit with a searcher, that's knowledge that you know what is coming up in your deck. And with Law, you have the highest opportunity to run the maximum amount of searchers in the game, which means even if you aren't getting, to that kid off of your searches, you know how many are available, which can dictate, how many cards you want to take in your damage zone, how much are you willing to put Dawn on Killer to draw a card. Combined with the fact that I think that 5-cost Law is just beyond insane. It's probably the best stat line in the game, the 5-cost 6k power with blocker. And the ability to bounce something back to hand and replay it, that ability is already so insane, but when combined with Ronoroa Zoro, it feels freaking broken, man. Like, I don't know why you're allowed to do that. That just breaks the barriers of the stat line, just allowing you to, re-attack something that they already discarded counter with, multiple times. It allows you to play around multiple triggers. They could tap your Zoro with a Punk Gibson, you return it back to hand, you replay it. And out of all other things, it allows you to protect your searchers, which is probably the most degenerate thing in the game. That's why I enjoy the Control Law build currently, because it's all focused on how can I return my Bonnie to hand, how can I protect it so that I can just keep getting +1s every single turn. And I just don't see how you're going to not do well with this deck if you are in the upper echelon of the top % of players in the game. I think it's in your best interest to play this deck if you put in the hours, because of the level of skill expression in the mirror match, and that's what I'm looking for when I'm playing in a big tournament. This game doesn't really have a lot to put to the table in terms of deck building currently, like there is, but at the same time, what I mean by that is most of the cards in the game have a similar power level, but they allow you to bring forward different strategies. So one strategy may not be better than the other, but it just allows you to approach the meta in a different way. And since you can do that in so many ways with Law, where other decks you can't, it just makes the mirror match just so skillful. And in a best of one format, I'm looking to create the biggest edge in the mirror match as possible with the limited card pool, because you're going to go against, lots of mirror matches, I would assume, if you're doing well, especially in red-green, but most likely anything outside of blue. So, how do you feel about the deck?
I mean, I would say that this deck is, if you're looking for something that's going to, be a lot more to think about, like, for example, Zoro, not a lot of thinking. There's a little niche plays, but with this deck, there's a lot you have to think about. Like, there's different targets to swap out. There's, what are you going to swap out this card for what? Like, there's a lot. Then you're going to search. But I will say, like, this deck looks really fun. I personally haven't played it yet. I've went against it a lot, and I definitely agree that it can win. Like, it's a pretty tough deck to beat.
Now, I want to bring up the negatives of this deck. The first negative of this deck that I don't see anyone talking about is, oftentimes, whenever you win with this deck, you're either at 1 life or you're at 0. And that's something that I honestly just don't like very much. You know, regardless of how definitive you think it is, it just feels like if the guy has a little bit variance here that could change the tide of the game potentially, he could kill me, you know? Even if I'm winning consistently, it just feels so unsafe with, cards like the unblockable Luffy, Diable Jambe, where they can just, kill you out of nowhere. Or if they just hit a trigger on you, like especially in red, if they trigger like a jet pistol, and you miss lethal because they killed your last attacker and you weren't able to play around it, then you're like, okay, I pass back to my opponent's turn. I have 2 blockers up, but I'm already at 1 life or 0 life, so he has a base chance to just kill me anyway. That's so irritating.
Yeah, the four life is definitely a thing to worry about because, like he said, if they hit those triggers on you and you're like, that's why you lost, that's a terrible feeling.
Now, the other thing that I don't like about the deck is just how polarizing it is versus purple when they have like a god curve out hand. It just feels like it doesn't matter what hand you open. They just win the game, If they open Island into, 7-drop King, into 10-drop Kaido, into 7-drop King, or Queen, back-to-back Queen is just so polarizing. It just feels so irritating because then you're like, you came into the tournament thinking I had the most skill expression to bring to the table, and that person just removed it. And personally, I think that Kaido is going to be the most represented deck at this event because it's the easiest to build, it's the easiest to get a hold of the cards, and if you haven't been living under a rock, the distribution channels are, so messed up that being able to enter the game right now, I think, is just such a high barrier to entry because your local game store doesn't have like even starter decks for you to get into the game.
Yep.
But purple is definitely one of the starter decks I think that is more accessible to people because currently at our locals, they have a surplus of all of the starter decks except for red, which they just ran out of. And we consistently have 20 plus people most tournaments, and quite a few people gravitate towards Kaido, and the law deck is just, it feels really bad to go up against that deck. And if you think there's going to be a lot of Kaido, that's something to consider. And there are a couple ways you can angle the deck to beat it. I just don't like that, I want to center the deck around ACOS Kid because I think it's just, if not the best card, one of the best cards in the game. It's not even really a card. It's just, a fucking black hole. It's like, the boogeyman. You really cannot escape it. Sometimes if you have that card, the other person just cannot win. Yeah. But when you have that in your deck, it just decreases your chance of beating that deck that, is that even a worse matchup? And I don't know, man. I think that one of the strongest things about the law deck after, getting into it more and understanding the levels to it is the red events anyway, because they are Supernova Straw Hat, which is, just the most broken combination of types in the game currently. And I've personally been playing 4 Red Hawk in my build, and I just think that is an insane combo, having Kid plus Red Hawk, but it's just terrible versus Kaido. So that's something definitely to consider. I think that you will definitely have a chance to win the event regardless. But if you get cheesed by Kaido, remember your boy beats by Ash. Because I told you what was coming.
Yeah, I agree. We'll definitely see a lot of players for sure.
Definitely going to be highly represented because, once again, people think they have the highest opportunity to customize the deck. And, that's always a big upside because other leaders, it seems very streamlined, very solved right now.
Yeah.
And now we're going to go on to Kazuki Oden. So do you want to start off by saying anything about Kazuki Oden?
I really haven't I haven't played this deck, and I've only won against it one time, so I don't have that much opinion on it. So I'll let you start it.
So the thing about this leader is, it allows you to play green, which green is probably the strongest color consistency-wise. And what I mean by that is, there are a lot of hands in green where you just get to play the game, and you're going to play the game in most matchups. You have access to 2 searchers, which is, the highest out of any number of colors in the game, and the Momo Nosuke searcher, which is, sometimes a miss in Law and Kid. It becomes, a pretty much a guaranteed hit because you're adding in the Kinemon, and the Kinemon allows you to double attack. So, you're gaining that leader ability. And I think as the format's progressed, we've started to all understand the value behind 2 cost event counters that give you 4K, being Punk Gibson in green. And that is the advantage that this deck has over Kid, is that when you play down your 8-drop, you're going to be able to have your Punk Gibson online with 9 Dawn Up or 8 Dawn Up instead of having to wait till you have 10 Dawn Up in normal Kid, because you got to, put him out and then you got to tap him, and then you only have 1 Dawn left, and it's just like, sometimes they have that one brief turn to kill your Kid, or you just drew multiple Punk Gibson and they were unusable. And so this leader just allows you to capitalize on that. And honestly, I think that just because it's green, if you're good, you can make it into Top Cut because green is the most consistent color. And regardless of how good you think it is, just by having access to that card pool, it's going to be, relatively possible for you to win. And I think that pretty much the deciding factor behind why I think this could, make it into Top Cut is that people don't have experience playing against it. Yeah. And I personally think that it's the deck that people have the least amount of experience playing against, This deck and the Blurple Croc deck, people have the least amount of experience playing against. But in my personal experience, a lot of times I saw people start with Oden at the beginning of the format and they just couldn't figure it out. So then they switched over to Kid because it was an easy alternative. And what that did is it made that person not feel like it was as powerful as they thought it was, but also they didn't fully learn the matchup for when they go against someone who does understand the deck. And ultimately, whether it's better or worse than Kid, it's still in that upper echelon of, consistency. And so I think you're going to see this in Top Cut. And I think a lot of the players that want to bring something different to the table, want to get an edge in the deck building aspect of the game, are going to bring this leader for that reason. I know this guy at my locals who he consistently does good with Oden, and he's the only person I know who has won with Oden, but he just makes it seem like it's this meta threat that no one knows the answer to because of the way that he plays it. It's hard to understand what's happening and what they can be doing, because getting that extra 2 Dawn, it just makes it to where the boards are different, on certain key turns where you have this pattern recognition versus the Kid decks. And I think it just throws, a lot of misdirection out there. So I would say that you can reach Top Cut if you're a good pilot. And I don't see a lot of spots being taken up by this deck. But if there was a specific team of people who are going to be playing the same list, and maybe they could potentially do good and take up multiple spots in Top Cut. So I would put this at the top of can reach Top Cut. Definitely the top. Maybe take up multiple spots depending on,
really
how we feel about other decks, I've
crazy.
seen people gaining popularity on it. The big thing is people don't have a lot of experience with it. And I think if people had more reps with it, I would feel more comfortable saying that you're going to see it quite a bit.
That's interesting to me, because I was going to say that I think it should go in can reach Top Cut, good pilot.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly kind of what describes this deck, is if you're a good pilot. Interesting that you say top and almost will take multiple spots, because I was thinking that in my eyes it's almost borderline right above X2 drop, because I mean it is green. Green's a great deck and everything, but leader wise, I believe that it is barely in this tier. It's barely above X2 drop. Not saying it's a bad deck. It's pretty good. But comparing it to every other deck and just trying to be fair and not stacking up too much of the tier list, yeah, like it can reach top cut, good pilot, but you really gotta you gotta be a good pilot, and you gotta hope that you're going against people that don't really understand what's happening.
Exactly.
Because that's gonna be a big way to win against them. Because I went against it a lot. I didn't know what was happening, and I did lose. And eventually, the last time I played it, I did win, and I kind of understood what was happening more, and I went for lethal when normally I wouldn't have, and it paid off, and it won. So
I see what you're saying. I think to give a better explanation of that, what I mean is, in this event, since there's going to be a lot of people have said this about the game, that if you're a good player, you can do good with any deck in the game because of how close the decks are, and because of how fair the card pool is. There aren't certain cards that are like, okay, I just need to have this in my deck or I'm not playing the game. In comparison to something like Yu-Gi-Oh, where it's that's half of your deck are these staple cards that you need to play. I just feel like you can do good with whatever you're wanting to play, and for that reason, I could just see there being a couple teams going to this event that are going to do good on no matter what deck they're playing. And the way I could see this taking up multiple spots in Top Cut is if those people are playing the same thing, and they get to the end together. It's still going to be a very low amount of people entered in the tournament playing this deck at all, but it's for that reason. And I think a lot of people have just underestimated the power of having two searchers at full power, because
that is the best
this is the best thing. It's okay, well, the effect to tap and add something versus just playing Nami and just putting it on the board is just detrimental. And the fact you can't miss in this deck with both searchers that have that mechanic that allow you to protect them and keep returning them is just beyond disgusting to me. And I think if people, understood that and were able to exploit that it could be a crazy sleeper.
I mean, and again, Momonosuke is actually you're running 4 in this deck.
Yeah.
And Kid, you could tell me you're running 2. I'd be like, okay, 3, okay, 4, But Oden, for sure, running 4. I would say that's almost...
Exactly.
That's your better searcher in that deck.
And think about it like this. We know from the Japan metagame that with the release of Set 2, Momonosuke becomes one of the most powerful cards in the meta. And why does it become one of the most powerful cards in the meta? Because we increase the number of targets that it has.
The Wano package.
So who's saying we can't increase the number of targets it has now and gain that same effect while the overall power level of the card pool is a bit lower,
Okay. One last thing before we go to the next deck is shout out Law of Casualty. That's all I gotta say. Alright. So now Doflamingo. I think a lot of people don't have the experience or understand or have went against this deck, because when I was first, researching what decks are good and everything, this deck was always at the bottom. But I will say that this deck, in my eyes, has one of the highest chances of winning the entire event. Blue Doflamingo is good.
I definitely can see, how that's possible. And it's definitely going to come down to who you're going to play in Top Cut. Because if you go against the green people in Top Cut, it's going to be quite a bit more irritating. I think that I've been one of the most successful people to play the deck. I've won about 7 or 8 tournaments with the deck, and I've pretty much only went X2 drop I think 2 times playing the deck, and I've beat quite a few green people. I beat quite a few law people, and I angled the deck to beat those people. Now the problem is, it's bad against law if they're playing the deck that is solely dedicated to playing 8-cost Kid, which isn't very popular, I'm going to be honest.
Not popular at all.
If people come to the tournament playing that, then, you're going to be in a bad situation. And also, if you go against Kid, it's going to be the highest represented deck alongside Kaido. So if you do go against, those people in Top Cut, and instead of Swiss, where the people are a little bit more unfamiliar about the matchup and you can express more skill that way, then you're probably going to get stopped in Top Cut. Whereas if it's the other way around and you like eat away at a couple of those, those players in Swiss, and then in Top Cut, you go against Kaido, you go against Zoro, Luffy. I mean, it's just free wins because... Let me put it this way. I think that, honestly, if you go against anyone who's playing mono red with Doflamingo and you lose 9.5 out of 10 times, it was a skill issue. It literally doesn't matter what your hand is. If you build the deck the way that I build the deck, I just don't think you can lose. Similarly to Kaido, one thing that I think a lot of people have a misconception about is that the deck loses to Kaido. And personally, I've only lost to Kaido 2 times. And in multiple tournaments, I went undefeated because I beat like 3 to 4 Kaidos in a row. I mean, the deck literally just farms Kaido because I'm going to attack you. And, oh, by the way, most people playing Kaido choose to go second now, which is even more advantageous to you. But, for example, let's say I start attacking you on turn 2, turn 3 with a guaranteed hit off the top of my deck. And then you curve out and you're amazing. You play 10 cost Kaido on turn 4, turn 5. What you have the ability to do, you're forced to throw it down because I have 3 to 4 generated bodies on the board, and that's the only AoE in the game, so you have to use that. But the thing is, you put that down, you're at 2 life, okay? I generated those cards for free. My hand is 8 cards. All I have to do is put down a couple blockers. If I put down 2 people that are 4 cost, there's no way for you to answer it because you're going into the next turn with 7 Dawn. You can play a king of 6 or 7 cost, answer one of those guys. I'm hitting you twice. Or if I just have a Kuma on board, when you drop the Kaido and I get to start my turn with a Pacifista, you're just dead. The only way the person playing Kaido can beat you is if he goes 5-drop queen into 5-drop queen. Into 5-drop queen, which has happened to me a couple times, and that's very possible. But I don't really think that you should determine your choice of deck and how powerful you think a deck is based off of anecdotal evidence, based off of like 1 or 2 experiences you have, because that is a big if, It's really just going to come down to, do you think you're going to go against more green or more purple? And, if you think you're going to go against more purple and more red, then you can definitely sneak it in there. And one thing that I don't see anyone bringing up is the fact that this mirror match has one of the highest levels of skill expression in the game. And personally, I think it is the highest level of skill expression in a mirror match, because you have to think about how many cards do I discard to protect this guy, or should I just let it go? And you're memorizing a set of information that no one else has access to. And so people who haven't played against that strategy enough, who haven't played it personally, they don't really understand like what your thought process is and like able to make good reads off of that. So that's where I think if you're like a top player, it is a really good strategy to bring, because personally, I've found ways to angle the deck to specifically beat green that I haven't necessarily shared with people because I want to win with the deck some more, and the format's getting later into it where I want to get a couple more wins before we get into set 2. But I think that if you do understand some of those, key ways to angle the deck, it does become better. And on top of all of that, I currently think that the best 2K 2 cost counter, 2 cost event counter in the game is Level of Beam, being that all of the 4K counters in the game, they don't guarantee you a card, whereas Level of Beam does. And the leader itself allows you to manipulate, what's on the top of the deck, which means you can set yourself up for multiple sequences of Level of Beam. Specifically, like in a situation I had in my most previous tournament, I went against Kaido and I actually chose to, instead of using my leader ability, I set myself up to play 3 level up beams in a row, which is
That's gnarly.
which it just made the other guy think that he could kill me with 10 cost Kaido because, you know, obviously he thought it was unblockable by putting all of his Dawn on and attacking. And I just gave my leader plus 16k power.
Oh my gosh.
And that just allowed me to win the game. So that's something definitely to think about. But depending on how many losses you're allowed to take in Swiss, that's going to be a big determining factor about the deck because, you know, if you can make it to top cut being X2, I mean, you're really only going to lose to green. Sometimes you will lose to green, but ultimately, you know, you can get lucky too, especially if you go first.
It really depends on if you really understood the deck and put in hours because I've seen you beat green countless of times. My other friend plays the same deck. I've only ever beat him one time with green. And he's brand new to card games in general. And he picked up the deck from the beginning and he's beaten me every single time except for one time. I think that this deck, even though green and purple counter it or you're going to lose to them, you'll be surprised how many times you actually come out on top against those decks.
So, final words on the deck. I'd like to say that you could win, but at the same time, there are not going to be multiple people in Top Cut with this deck. Let's just get that straight. You know, you could win, and you could get lucky.
These are for the people that have put in hours that know they're going to have a good chance.
Yeah. So, honestly,
definitely above law. You don't think so?
I mean, I think in terms of representation, I would put it behind it. I think let's put it at the last spot of could win because if it is going to win, it's going to be like, you know, I would say there's probably only like maybe 10 people in the country that could probably win with the deck.
Okay.
You know,
so you're saying representation. Okay, I see what you mean.
Because, you know, there are some people who I've seen do better than me with the deck. There's a guy I personally know who has been 37-0 with the deck in tournaments. But this guy lives in Australia, and he's not coming to the event.
What the heck? 37-0.
No, like literally, like he has recorded the tournaments, and he was 37-0 with the deck. He's only lost a couple times with the deck in online tournaments, never in person. You know, but I don't see people in the USA doing that, and I think people just don't put hours into the deck because they think it's just, you know, ass. But, you know, if you look at the very top players' content and what they're putting out there, they've said that the deck is good. You know, you can win with the deck.
Great. It's amazing. Like, anytime I go against this deck, I sit down, boom, see the leader. I just think, great, okay.
It's gone to the point where I keep just coming into the tournament, and there's 20-plus people, and I'm like, damn, I really want to go kid here. I really want to go law. I want to have fun. I want to be more consistent. And then I'm just like, dude, every time I don't go with this leader, I just get like cheesed by some RNG effect.
Yep.
And with this leader, at least when I lose, it's because of a skill issue. There was at least a route that I could have made that put us within, you know, the 1 damage mark. Oh, and on top of that, I just want to say, whenever you win, 9 out of 10 times, I'm at 4 life. That's literally the best thing about the deck. It's like, dude, I win so many times when I'm at 4 life and the guy's at 0, and it's like, okay, this guy had no chance to win.
I'll say that we'll leave it behind law, but personally, I personally think it's above it. But in terms of representation, I get it.
I'm getting ready for the haterade in the chat. Come at me. Turn up the engagement. Okay, I'm ready. Give me the engagement on the channel, boys.
Oh, God. All right. Next deck, Blurple Kaido.
Blurple Kaido.
Just the worst version of Blurple Croc.
It's the worst version of Blurple Croc. It's the worst version of Kaido.
I have nothing really to say about it besides exactly what tier it needs to go into. So I'll let you just...
It's literally an uphill battle, you know? And honestly, like, the 2-color leaders at this point in the game, because the power level of overall cards isn't that high, going 2-color leaders is just so risk, man. Like, Law is just, you know, a really busted effect, and red and green are the 2 best colors in the game. Now, I want you to think about it like this. if Law had the same ability and he was in not both of those colors he is in, and maybe he dipped into another color, like let's say he was just green purple or green blue, he would not be nearly as good, nearly as consistent as he is. And the more of the reason why he's so good is just because he's in the two best colors in the game, and his effect is, okay. Whereas Blurple Kaido, it's like, okay, purple has really strong cards, but it's also not nearly as consistent, and you basically just have a blanket leader effect. Even if this leader had a good effect, I don't know that you would play it.
Explain the effect for everybody watching.
So the effect is that if you KO something on your turn, you get a Dawn, but then your leader doesn't have any way to return Dawn to the Dawn deck. So in some hands, you just can't get rid of the Dawn more quickly than you are able to generate it. And at the same time, there's not even that many effects in the game that currently let you do that. And most of the time, you got to think about when you're playing purple, there's a lot of times when you're taking a turn away from developing so that you can gain advantage in the hand, or you can remove advantage from your opponent, and then they have a chance to do more damage to you. And the fact you're at 4 life, that just lowers your potential chance to win. We think about how many times the Kaido player wins and he's at 1 or 0 life. I see that happen quite often, and a lot of the reasons why the Kaido player even wins those matchups are because that leader ability is just so versatile. The fact that you can take Dawn away from it being attached under people as well as being tapped, returning Dawn to the Dawn deck is just a broken mechanic. I honestly kind of don't like that that's even a mechanic in the game, because it just leaves room for things to just be like fucking busted later on. Like, why are you allowed to just put Dawn under people and then just return it like it's not a resource? That's part of the reason. The only reason this leader is good is because 5-cost Queen, I personally think it's just the best card in the game. It's just fucking degenerate, and I kind of just wish that card was not in the game altogether, because it just does so many things for you. So I think that you are not going to reach day 2. You just can't reach day 2. But you could win locals. So we'll put it next to. We're not going to spend any more time on this.
Simple tier list, or simple to explain where this is going.
It's just worse than Blurple Croc.
Right there. There's not much explaining.
And the artwork on Blurple Croc is just cooler. If he had a cigar, maybe I would feel like putting more hours into it, but it doesn't have.
The sad thing is that we one of the first, I think it was the second box that we opened together, we got the alt art of Blurple Kaido, and I didn't understand how the decks all worked yet, and so we get it. I'm like, sweet, and then I'm just like, oh wait, this is just kind of the worst deck in the meta. So
100%.
That was a little hurtful. All right, so now we got Croc next, Blue Croc.
So Croc, I've heard some people say that Croc can be good, versus red, versus purple. Obviously, it has the same disadvantages as Doflamingo does. It's not good versus green, but your leader doesn't generate you any value. It's a big tempo swing, and it's like, okay, well, there's so many cards in colors that dip into green, into leaders that dip into green, that they just create so much tempo on play that I don't see how the return Dawn effect even allows you to compensate for that aspect. You're like, okay, I return back his one guy on board he's gonna attack with his Raizo. Okay, now he just plays down his Law and just puts it back on the field, or he discards it with his leader. It's like it just serves so many purposes for him that it's like you didn't even really do anything. And it's like, okay, you use that ability. Now you have no Dawn. Okay. Well, now he uses another one of his cards that taps one of your guys that's already in play. And then you're like, okay, it goes back to me. He killed my guy because he's just allowed to tap my shit for no reason. And now I just have nothing on board. And now I have no Dawn. So even if my leader ability was relevant, I'm still just behind for no reason, and I just don't see how you could win with this. People say it's good, but ultimately, I think the cards that are good in blue are the cards that you want to summon off the Doflamingo leader ability.
Exactly.
So it's just like, damn, I'm just using this guy, and I just can't summon these cards for free off the top of my deck. Like,
and like, you know, if it, I don't think it'll win, but if it does, or if it takes multiple spots, I'll be very shocked. Because again, like you said, the cards that you like or that are good in that, you want to summon off Doflamingo.
Yeah.
So like, I think it's, you know, I think it goes in good pilot. Can reach top cut, good pilot. Like, I wouldn't say X2 drop. I mean, there will be a lot of people that probably will play this that will do that. But again, if you're a good pilot, you understand the deck, you put in the hours, you can reach top cut for sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to resonate towards it that wanted to play blue, but didn't put the hours into playing Blurple Croc or Doflamingo because it's a little bit easier, you know? It's like, okay, generate value on the board, use your Sentimaru, create free pacifistas, then return his stuff. Just general like value strategy, but you don't have to do as much thinking. So I think a lot of people are going to be like interested in it for that reason. And it's still going to have the same advantages of playing blue, where you have a really strong chance to beat red. So you're going to see some people in the later rounds just by like going against red. But ultimately, when those people go against someone that is playing green, they have a less chance to even just luck out and beat green. At least with Doflamingo, if you angle your deck to beat that strategy, there are some games you can win. Because, you know, like he said, I won a lot of tournaments. I beat a lot of people in the finals that were on green. Beat a lot of people in the finals that are good. Like some of the best people that I've ever met. People who literally have won more tournaments than me.
Yep.
And I just don't see the potential you can have that with Crocodile. So
I just feel like you're kind of holding yourself back if you're going to play blue Croc and not blue Doflamingo.
100%.
But I understand that, you know, maybe you haven't put in the hours because Doflamingo is fairly complicated. So in that case, I understand it. But again, I think can reach top cut. But
yeah, definitely worse than Kazuki Oden though.
Yeah, and overall, you know, what I'm saying or preaching is that if you're gonna play blue, play Doflamingo. So yeah. Also,
in the mirror match, there's not a lot of skill to be expressed.
Mm-hmm.
That's another thing you got to consider. You know, since there's only so many decks in the game, at least with Doflamingo, the mirror match is extremely skill intensive. With Croc, it's just like, okay, I was ahead on board. I'm going to continue using my leader ability to become more ahead on board. And it's very hard to come back, you know, when you're behind.
Yeah. All right, so next we got Blurple Croc.
Okay. Let me tell you the story of Blurple Croc. So when I first got into the game, you know, I looked up this deck because I got into purple. I was introduced into the game with purple, and I just didn't find it as fun because I didn't feel like there was a lot of skill expression. And I saw like a couple people online playing this, and I saw like how fun it seemed. The general idea of the deck made me feel like, okay, there's a lot of potential here. There's a lot of similarities to, you know, the components of why I enjoyed Yu-Gi-Oh! And I thought it was an okay deck. Come to find out,
because you're looking for a control deck?
Yeah, it's just control. It's like my most similar, you know, thing you could play to playing a control deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'm just like, okay, apparently this deck is not as good as I thought, you know? And then so the momentum of the deck went down, down, down. I never really saw anyone who won with it. But when I first started with the deck, I was extremely new to the game, and that made me give up on the deck because I was just losing to people who weren't putting in as much time as me. And then I began to realize something over time, that 5 cost queen is once again the most broken card in the game. And the fact you get to have that in your deck, that just gives you, you know, a chance to win. Because with this deck, you're able to play 4 Doflamingo, 4 Perona, which means you can rearrange your deck to set yourself up to having that on the play on turn 5, or I mean on 5 dawn or 6 dawn. And in some matchups, it can be extremely hard for them to win, because I want to explain to everyone the reason why 5 cost 6Ks are so important in this meta is because the turn you put it into play, the other person is going to withhold 1 attack, or you get a value trade. What I mean by that is he attacks, you block with it and only have to discard a 1K in hand instead of a 2K, and it lives till your next turn. Or they just hold back 1 attack because you have a free blocker, it comes back to you. And then from then on, you just put 1 Dawn under it and it becomes 7K, which 7K is the magic number.
Oh, God.
Yeah, so that's extremely important. And the other thing you got to think about this card is you're discarding something that doesn't have counter every time, and you're drawing 1 card at least that has counter, and most likely a 2K, which gives you a high potential chance to protect it during that initial turn that you block with the card. So overall, by having that in your deck, you're in an insane position, and you also just win so hard against Kaido. And I think the Kaido, once again, is going to be the most represented deck. So if you're metagaming that you're going to play against only Kaido, you know, I think the deck is very strong. And if we have to classify it by what deck are people going to know the least about, it's going to be in that category that Doflamingo is in, that category that Kazuki Oden is in, other than the fact that those cards in Oden are less complicated to begin with. It's very hard to keep track of what the guy's doing, especially if he is playing for Perona for 3-cost Doffy, rearranging the deck with Desert Spada, drawing multiple cards. You know, it's hard to calculate how many counters he could have in hand. And I think that's something that a lot of people will, you know, not be prepared for, because they don't understand the correct turn they can kill. And, you know, that's why the deck is very important. Yeah, the deck is very good versus red as well. You know, good versus red, good versus Kaido. Those are the 2 decks that people who have the least amount of time to put into the game but would like to be competitive in will resonate with. Those are the, you know, 2 of the easiest colors to get into. You know, other than the fact that you need, for Zoro, most things in the red deck are either promo or, you know, starter deck, and most people have those cards because they collected them first, you know, before they were expensive, since that is, you know, the fan favorite, like, archetype, the fan favorite character. There's going to be a lot of people on that no matter what. And I think you have a good chance to sneak into top cut, to be honest. And one last thing I'll say about the deck before we move on is that I think there's a lot of things that we just haven't figured out about this, because people in Japan didn't figure it out, and only a couple people now are starting to figure it out. And at this point, a lot of people recognize that it's almost not worth it to put in hours to the deck if you haven't started, because of how much time we have left in this format. So, you know, I don't think you'll see it. I don't think that anyone is as confident as you would think, and the people that are extremely confident on the deck regardless will most likely go with something like Kid or Oden, just because it's just kind of more of a consistent, you know, color. You have the highest chance to open playable. Okay.
So where are you putting this at?
Definitely above Croc, but below Oden.
Okay. Yeah, I really haven't played. I haven't played this deck, and I've only played against it about 3 times, so I really can't say anything. I don't want to put any misinformation out there. All right, next we got King.
Okay.
Another deck where
Okay. If you go against King in round 1 or round 2,
you win.
Congratulations, sir. You got a free buy. You are now in the VIP club. So I'm put him there.
Yeah, I'm gonna say we might as well just move on from that one. We all know.
If you win King, you're a brokey, and you couldn't afford 2 starter decks to get a better purple leader. That's all we can say about you.
All right, next we got Uta from the film promo pack.
I've never seen anyone play this leader. I've never seen anyone win. It's just so bad. Put it next to King.
There's one dude I've seen play it at the locals. I haven't won against him, and that's mainly because he would leave the top table.
Yeah, or he just drops.
Yeah. Bloking.
Yep.
Okay. Next. All right. Let me talk about this deck for a second. Luffy, aka almost slept on as hard as Doflamingo, because everybody thought, oh, Zoro is the red leader. Zoro. Turns out, after the film promo pack came out, Luffy is good and really good. Like it can beat, I think, every deck. I don't really know what counters it too hard, because I personally have not lost against any of the decks with this deck.
Pretty much just Doflamingo, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense too, because like that was the hardest matchup. But again, I have not lost with this deck.
You know, and how do you beat Doflamingo with red? You're going to get value from Nico Robin. And
Depot.
What does this deck do better than Zoro? It allows you to activate your Nico Robin more often than the Zoro player, because you know you can put it out on turn 3 and then you can put a Dawn under it immediately. So you know, on 5 Dawn, you're going to be able to use all of your Dawn and just still put one under Nico Robin, which means you could play an Otama plus a Law, which kills something. You know, I just think it's just better value, because, you know, that's pretty much the focal point of red, and why it's good is because Nico Robin is a degenerate card, as well as Jet Pistol, and you know, the effects of the Dawn 1X in red are just so strong. I think more strong than any other color. And I think it's something that people don't play around with enough. Everyone has this connotation that Zoro is the better leader because, you know, over time you think that you can create more natural attackers on the board. But if you're playing Luffy and you're going against a person who's playing Zoro, you know, they really shouldn't get to the point where they have more natural attackers than you if you were going for more of a mid-rangey strategy. You know, so for Zoro to be better than Luffy, in my opinion, it almost feels like you have to go away from that more mid-rangey strategy and go more towards full-on aggro. And I just currently don't think that's the best way to play the deck. You know, it's not much like better or worse by a lot, but neither is any deck in the game. I just think that Luffy just presents, you know, the highest % chance for you to put Dawn under people to trigger effects. And I think that's the direction that the deck has gone with the promo pack, and we've seen that in the past 2 weeks. You know, taking up multiple slots in the previous PPG, as well as the convention tournament in Houston. You know, I think Luffy has become a rising star. While they're both very good, I think that we have a higher chance of seeing Luffy in Top Cut than Zoro. Take up more spots, that is. And I think you definitely have a chance to win with Luffy. I think you could win, definitely.
I believe that it deserves to be in that tier.
I think it's the best deck in the game. I think people, a lot of people have said it is the most skill-intensive deck in the game, and you know that's very possible. And you got to think about. I would personally rather play Luffy into Law than Zoro into Law, because you have a higher chance to stop them from putting 5 characters on the board. Which ultimately you're going to see a lot of Law, you know, so I think you can definitely win with the deck, and I think that you should definitely be prepared for this deck and be prepared with the different styles of strategies people can bring with this leader.
Yeah, no, I agree. This is the most recent deck I've been playing, and like you said, I think it's the best deck in the game, and not a lot of, I mean, people are now starting to catch on, and I can't say I knew about it forever, but I just recently started playing it, you know, like 3 weeks ago, and yeah, it's in my opinion the best deck, but it's hard to put it in a certain, like, so we could put it in the could win tier, but in terms of representation, are we going to see more Luffy than Law? Because I believe there's going to be a lot of Law players, but again, I think it's above Law in terms of the deck. Which deck is better? But in terms of representation, I don't think there'll be that many Luffys.
That's true. Honestly, I mean, it can definitely, just go right up there. They're interchangeable. It doesn't really matter. Let's go ahead and just put it in front of it, for the sake of it. They're pretty much interchangeable for the reason being that these are the two most expensive decks in the game. And once again, we got to go back to those supply chain shortages. The fact that Ronoro Zoro is been almost up to $40 recently. You need 4 of those in both strategies, unless you decide to cut it from law completely, which is not very common. And then you also need 4 law in, red green, which, is also very expensive. And I think you're not going to see as many Luffys for that reason as well, because people who have committed to dropping that kind of money, they probably have also committed to buying law as well, because that's the biggest investment in the game. And if you have access to, a high portion of the expensive cards in the game, you probably have spent a little bit more money to access all of them.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and talk about, the Boogeyman.
Green Kid. Great deck.
Honestly, the deck is just so degenerate. It feels like Flunderies, man. It feels like Flunderies.
No, don't say that. Now I can't play it ever again.
I mean, it feels like Flunderies. It's definitely more skillful, but just in the way that you basically just put up a barrier statue, which, if you don't know what that is in Yu-Gi-Oh,
that's accurate.
It's just you don't get to play the game. And at least in this deck, there are ways to prevent the other person from doing that. There are ways to slow them down from getting to that step. Whereas in Yu-Gi-Oh, they just immediately have that aspect of the game turned off for you. But ultimately, when you get into the late game, this leader can just steal games. And also, versus Kaido, which once again is going to be highly represented, this leader can steal games as well by double attacking if they don't have the 5-cost queen on board. Most of the times, you're going to be able to just rush them down. And, by being the strongest color in the game, you have the highest chance to open up a playable hand. You have access to both searchers. Even if you don't have anything you want to search, it's just a free discard for your leader ability, making your leader ability honestly cost nothing in the late game. You're attacking them for 12 2 times, and there's pretty much almost no outplay potential unless the person has a big hand and has 2 Dawn up to use a 4K counter. So it's definitely going to be, the deck to beat, and that is a blessing and a curse. And then also we got to think about, it's one of the cheaper decks,
Yeah.
If you have access to 4 law, you can probably play the deck. Because I want to bring up that this is the only deck in the game where you only need 1 copy of the starter deck. And that's very important to note. Once you have 4 copies of 8-cost Kid, or maybe even 3, plus your laws, you've got the deck. Kid at the time of this recording is only $6. So, people are going to have access to it. It's a little bit easier to play than Kazuki Oden. Your overall card quality is so high. You do what Law does, except you have 5 life, which is very relevant because your game plan is going to be get to the end of the game and be at as much life as possible when you get to that point so that you can create a wall that your opponent can't break through. And if you successfully do that, you just start double attacking and your opponent cannot counter. You remove magic numbers from the game because you're always hitting for 12.
Yeah, and the biggest thing I would say, you really need to learn with this deck. Again, it's pretty, I don't want to say the word degenerate, but once you compare it to Flunderies, I almost want to say it. But the biggest thing you really got to understand is, when do you take a turn to use your leader's ability and clear their board and not just try to set up your board. That's, in my opinion, that it took me a couple weeks to understand that, and once I really grasped that, the deck was simple.
100%. Now, the one thing I don't like about this deck is, while it does have even matchups across the board, similarly to Luffy, it doesn't necessarily have bad matchups. The thing I don't like is that the mirror match, I just do not think is that high skill based. Once you get to the point where we're both competent players, if we both have a track record of winning, multiple tournaments in the past, come from previous games, understand the core components of the game. It really just comes down to like who draws better, who was able to establish a board presence first. Honestly, if I'm able to throw down a Basil Hawkins against you before you have developed anything, I just don't see how you can win. Like
it's who summoned Basil Hawkins first, and then the most important, who summoned Kid first. That's the mirror match.
100%, because if you're able to throw down Kid, then you obviously can just attack with all of your other people, and attacking no longer causes you to lose a resource by leaving your people vulnerable. So, your Basil Hawkins is just attacking two of their characters every turn, and they just can't access it. And then, it's just so degenerate, man. Like, against some matchups like Red, it just feels like, they just can't win. I have, I played against a guy last tournament where he normally plays Kid, but he was playing Red this time, and I'm just like, okay, I'll use my Bonnie to search. Okay, I hit Kid. Okay, I'm in a Bonnie search next turn, hit Kid. He plays a Luffy, kills both of them back to back. I use my Bonnie. I search a third time for Kid, and it's just like the guy was just like so mad, and I was just like, so excited that I just got to use Bonnie, to the full potential this time. For the one time, I was the Bonnie abuser, and not the one being abused, which...
How good did that feel?
Felt really good. It felt like there was a lot of skill expression. I was looking at the top cards in my deck. I was like, this is an oldie but goodie. Let's get this one on the board,
You're like third Kid. Yeah, I'll take that.
And it just has the highest number of low-cost blockers, whatever. Yeah. And also the fact that I think Punk Gibson is probably in that top spot of 4K counters, which, once again, I will reestablish the fact that 4K counters are, very important in the game now. Because if your deck is angled at reaching the late game, you need to play at least 2 to 4 4K counters in your deck. And you could argue that this deck has a higher benefit from, reaching the end game where those 4K counters are playable, because when you have an 8-cost Kid on the board plus a Punk Gibson, the other guy just can't win no matter what he's playing.
And then explain what Punk Gibson does for you.
So Punk Gibson allows you to rest one of their characters that is 4 or less alongside giving you 4K, which is very important to note because they could have like a Runner Zoro on board as well as, another attacker. Let's say they have Zoro plus Luffy. They played the Luffy last turn and didn't attack with it, so that this turn they could put a bunch of Dawn on it, and then they have the Zoro on board as well. Then they attack with their Luffy, putting a bunch of Dawn on it. You give your guy 4K. You also, counter with a 2K in hand, maybe 2Ks, because you've been just getting free searches because they just aren't allowed to touch your cards for absolutely no reason. So that attack fails. Then they shove Zoro. Oh, it's tapped now. I kill both of your guys. You have nothing. I still have my Kid. I still have, everything else on my board. You have no cards. I just win the game, All
right, so where would you put this at in the tier list?
I'm going to put it at the very top.
Very top.
In terms of sheer consistency, it is the most consistent deck in the game. That's why Trafalgar Law is so high. That's why Kazuki Oden has a high potential to reach the top cut. And if more people had put respect on Oden at the beginning of the format, I would like to put Oden at the top as well. I just don't really see, people really experiencing the deck for what it is. Yeah. People are just like...
It's a rare matchup.
I want to say that people have this connotation right now that, okay, why would I want to learn Oden when we're about to get Kinemon and it just replaces that person? When in all reality, is that, learning how to play this leader now will just give you an edge when that leader comes out in the future. So I think it's definitely something worth playing around with.
Yeah. All right, last deck, Purple Kaido.
Kaido, what would you like to say about this?
I mean, it's the only ramp deck. At first, I really thought this deck was not good. And this is when the game first came out. I didn't understand anything really. And eventually, it just got more and more solved, and people realized like exactly how you got to play it, how to you know, utilize the deck the best you can and how to really ramp up the best way. And once they get that ramp up way above you, it's really hard to get past or get over, I would say.
100%.
And, I mean, it's definitely going to be the most, like, Kid and Kaido are going to be the two top represented decks. You agree with that?
Exactly. And I think that this deck has the highest potential to beat Kid consistently, because it has a built-in opportunity to remove their 8-cost Kid from the board, which, is just eliminating their general game plan. And in the times that you curve out, that it just feels amazing. A lot of people have said this: when you open a certain sequence, it's like almost impossible for the other guy to come back because of how much tempo you gained. It's the only deck in the game that allows you to put a 12k attacker on the board. And we previously noted that minus dawn effects are just beyond degenerate,
Yeah.
Sometimes you just like develop the guy on the board that's 7k power, and then you just removed, 2 of his guys. And then you just didn't really lose any resources by doing that because your island just gives you an additional dawn. So really you just lost no dawn. You removed 2 of his things, played your thing. You have access to the most 2k counters in the game, which is an aspect that a lot of people don't bring up. You can potentially run 16 2k counters, and as the format has developed more, we've seen a lot of people gravitate towards the higher numbers of 2Ks, and it's been shown that has made it way more consistent for people than in the past. Also people started to understand that the 1-cost 2K is a mandatory effect to on-play look through your deck, even though you can't search the card that's listed on it, which ultimately allows you to know what cards are in your life zone, which then just tells you, how much damage should I take. It also has like the highest opportunity for you to mess around with different kinds of builds, because it has, just more different types of cards than other decks. All of the cards are powerful, and it brings a different strategy as a whole to the table. But the deck has way more modes you can access than any other strategy. Like you can go going second. I think it's pretty much the only color that I would say going second is viable. Coming into the game, I thought that going second with any deck was terrible because the way I look at it is the best colors in the game and the best decks in the game, they all have a turn 1 play. And coming from Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic, you think about it like this. The person who goes first gets to set up. Okay? The person who goes second doesn't get to set up, and they also don't get to attack. The fact that both people don't get to attack is just so polarizing to me. And it's so crazy that, purple is able to overcome that aspect of the game, because for the most part, that is really a rule that is abided by every other leader and every other color. And that just goes to show you the power of Onigashima Island, and how polarizing it is. And that's one of the reasons why I just don't really have interest in playing the deck, because I think that eventually you're going to go against another person who is on the deck and they will curve out better than you. They draw the island and you don't, and then you have no skill to express. Ultimately, that person is way farther ahead than you, so he has a greater opportunity to hold his 10-cost Kaido in hand longer than you because he's putting on the pressure and you are not, which ultimately causes you to lose the game. And then you're thinking to yourself, dang, what could I have done differently? I could have brought a different deck, or I could have drawn my island. And I'm not going to talk too much about it because a lot of people have discussed that aspect of the deck. But one thing I will say is this deck brings a different approach to a card game than anything we have ever seen before. If you were an OG Hearthstone player, then you understand the original mechanics of Druid, which allowed you to cheat out characters, consistently at the highest level. But at the same time, you have removal, at all aspects of the game. Even in Magic with ramp decks like Tron, you didn't have the same level of removal as this deck did at all levels of the game. Every other ramp deck we've seen in any card game, the ramp doesn't become available. The AoE effects don't become available until after you've reached that, that threshold of having such a mana advantage or a dawn advantage. And in this deck, you get to do it all. Your cards are so high power level. And also, one thing I don't hear anybody talk about is the fact that I think you just have the most playable cards that are 7K, as well as cards that can be pushed to 7K, such as 5-cost Queen, And we know that 7K is the largest number in the game. It's the best number to put Dawn on your characters efficiently. And one thing I want to bring up on this is, if you're going against a Kaido player, never put 1 Dawn on your character, on your leader, to put him to 6K, because when you do that, you're essentially just losing a resource for no reason, because they're going to discard a 2K, and if they discard a 1K, they didn't want to, because the 1K cards in the deck are cards they want to keep in hand because they're very valuable. So ultimately, the deck allows you to access a different strategy, a different proportion of the game that other decks aren't going about, which is the deck dives into the deck building aspect of the game versus the play and the sequencing aspects of the game, because there's so many directions you can go with. And if you're wanting to gain an edge with the deck, it's going to have to be by your build. Because the play is so streamlined. Once you become a good player with the deck and understand the matchups, you're going to be going through the motions each time. But when you bring, these different lineups, like recently we've been seeing people experiment with the 7-cost 9K, which is a very strong threat in the mirror match because it forces the other person to play their 10-cost Kaido first, ultimately giving you the upper hand in that matchup. And people weren't using that at all at the beginning of the format, and I saw very little, if not any, Japanese players using that, as well as people now maximizing on copies of Brachio Bomber, which when I was first introduced to the game, I thought that was the most broken card in the game. I remember being in your house and scrambling to find, the other copies of the card because I thought it was so broken. I'm like, wait, you get to remove something, and it just builds on the central strategy of the deck. Like, why would I not want 4 copies of this, And then in the beginning, people are like 1-0. I'm like, wait, what? And then over time, people just realize the card is insane,
Yeah.
And on top of that, they have access to the best 1-cost event in the game. The only 1-cost 4K event in the game. And, I've touched on it several times that 4K events are probably, the current magic number in terms of counter events in the game.
It's really the staple of events.
Yeah, and we've seen people maximize on 4 copies of that since the beginning because minus Dawn isn't even really a resource. It's just something that you do to heckle with your opponent because you're just like, ha, I don't care about this aspect of the game. But you don't. You're like, haha, you have a kid. Like, I have Kaido. I go Burr. You go Boom.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you block with Queen and you just use a 4K. It's easy.
Yeah, so ultimately, I'd like to put it in the same spot as Doflamingo where, you could win the event, but, there may not be as many people in Top Cut who are going to be on the deck because naturally some of those people will just knock each other out is what I'm thinking,
And I mean, realistically, if this deck is going to win or they're going to get, top 8 or whatever the cap is, you have to play perfectly. If you misplay, I mean, really depending against the deck, but if you misplay, you're not going to make it there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the games will come down to you're attacking for lethal and did that guy draw one of his 4K counters or not? Yeah. Because, a lot of those games, it comes down to you attacking and does the guy have enough counter in hand to stop your attack? Because if he does, you're dead. And I've touched on this several times that when you play Kaido, we see a lot of the best people win at 1 or 0 life. And we've seen Kaido come into the finals of several big tournaments, in the U.S., honestly, consistently at this point. And I don't think we've seen one win a big tournament in the U.S. yet. But I wouldn't be surprised because it is very good versus Kid, which is a highly represented deck. And it's good versus, Law, another highly represented deck. Probably the deck that most of the good players are going to be on.
Yeah.
Its only really, hard counter matchup is the Doflamingo, which isn't going to be very frequently seen. The problem with it is there's just going to be so many people on it that when you go against that other person, it's worse than the Kid mirror match. I think it's just the worst mirror match in the game. It's so irritating. And, I've seen, the thing about the deck is I've seen a lot of good people win with the deck. I've also just seen some of the most new, I don't want to call anybody bad, but people who have put less hours in the game than other people just win with the deck. And, I've seen them just, sack people.
10 cost Kaido is just so polarizing. But now, people...
It's the only AoE in the game.
People are really, being careful and watching that, expecting to have that nowadays. Because, when it first started, a lot of people that weren't very good and didn't have a lot of time in the game were winning because people wouldn't really play it around that very well, which is hard to believe. But I saw it. I've done it. And nowadays, if I'm going against Kaido, I'm thinking the whole time, okay, what turn is he going to be at 10? And how much dawn am I going to have? What am I going to establish here? So.
100%. I think I'd like to put it in front of Doflamingo, in terms of, I see it getting to the finals, to be honest. And I would say that it's going to have more spots in Top Cut than Doflamingo, but probably not as many as Zoro, Really, Zoro and Luffy are going to have a similar amount of spots in Top Cut. I just see the Luffy, having a higher chance to get to the finals because you just have a higher level of skill expression.
Yeah, and I really hope that Luffy does take the tournament because I believe it can.
100%.
It's an insane deck. I think it's one of the funnest decks too.
Oh, for sure. That mid-range style. And one thing I want to address before we close this one out, because we're getting to about a half an hour now, is that I think that the 4-cost Trafalgar Law is a card that people have not played enough around with, and I think that you could put it in Law. I think you could put it in Red-Green Law. I think if you're going for the control aspect build, where you're kind of more centered around playing for value in the mid game, playing around, the 8-cost Kid, it's another card that combos with your Jet Pistol, which is a card that can be added off of both of your searchers. And it allows you to get rid of stuff like the 7-cost Kid. And we've seen the way that Law beats Kid oftentimes is they double Otama effect. And then Jet Pistol to kill the Law. To kill the Kid. And, that's just another card that allows you to access that aspect of the game. But in Luffy, once again, it allows you to do that same kind of effect with Nico Robin. And so it's just 4 and 4 of those. And in Law, it's a card that people don't think about it being a cheatable out card, At 4 cost... I don't feel bad about using my leader ability to play that. Leader ability, bounce back Bonnie. Because sometimes you just want to bounce back Bonnie to hand so they can't kill it. And you don't want to put out a Luffy because you may not be able to protect it. So you put that out, minus them 2k on their 8-cost Kid, play an Otama. That's 3. Then you use 4 to Jet Pistol it. It's pretty good, And also, sometimes you want to set up that Jet Pistol play, but you don't have a Momonosuke, because oftentimes these people play 0 or 2 Momonosuke or 3 Momonosuke in the Law list, and I've seen a lot of people win with 0, and that's a card you can out of Bonnie. So that means you don't have to dedicate yourself to the Land of Wano package, but now you can still accomplish that same goal of what the Land of Wano package does.
Yeah. All right, well, I have a question for you, and I'm sure the viewers are wanting to know. What decks are you rooting for to win?
Honestly, I really hope, like you said, that Luffy wins, because I think it's something that a lot of people, have kind of, counted out. And I think that it has the most depth in terms of, the best cards are in that promo pack, which people haven't messed around with enough. I really like Ben Beckman. The 7 costs 9K. And I also like Shanks because people really undervalued Shanks. Towards the middle of the format, at the beginning of the format, people were like, you just play one Shanks, it's just a one of, I got manga Shanks, I got manga Shanks, and then it's like, well, maybe you should play two. It's like, I don't know, I only got one manga Shanks, bro. This,
I didn't pull two, man.
My manga Shanks is graded, I can't put it in the deck, bro. It's like.
That's funny. It's graded.
That's actually so true. I just want to say, if you went and got your One Piece cards graded, fuck you. That's literally just so dumb.
Yeah.
It's like the supply of those 10s and those 9s in this game is unlimited because the quality control is just insane. And no one wants to buy those.
Yeah, and I mean the game's brand new. You're already getting graded. Like, come on, man.
No facts. But yeah, and off that note, I want Luffy to win. I would love to see a Kazuki Oden win. Kazuki Oden in the finals would be really cool for me.
That would be really cool, actually.
Because I think it has a lot of experimentation to be done. And I just don't know that it can get there. I really don't want to see, kid versus kid or kid versus Kaido finals.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's kind of, everybody's expecting. And I want to see something unexpected.
Exactly. So, honestly, we're putting our money in the Dream Super Bowl. Kazuki Oden versus Doflamingo. Kazuki Oden, Doflamingo.
That'd be tough.
That'd be tough. Also, Blurple Croc. I think Blurple Croc is really strong, but I just don't think anybody has the balls to play it. And if you have the balls to play it, you're just going to play a better deck. Or you just play Kazuki Oden.
Yeah, and it's like, if you go on YouTube, I don't really see anything about Blurple Croc. I think everybody's kind of given up on it. They're like, okay, let me either just play meta or let me play these decks that are, counted out, but everybody is starting to realize it is good and could win.
100%.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be all for this episode. If you have any questions about what decks you think you should play for the event, or any questions you have about what I think should a deck be played like, make sure to let us know down below. If you want to follow Prod Lilindigo on YouTube for music, make sure to do so. Make sure to follow my Twitch, Beats by Ash Official.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And make sure to stay tuned for more One Piece content as we keep upgrading the channel and keep making this setup even better. We're just going to produce more bangers, and ultimately, when we get to go to these events, we're just going to get W's, I'm really going to just establish myself as one of the best people because, can't stop the Croc,
I will say, this man puts hours into this game and these videos for you guys, and he's a GOAT at the game. He's insane.
I'm literally just in my head comboing right now. I'm thinking about how I'm going to be blocking the 10 cost Kaido. I'm 4 turns ahead of you right now.
So for the people that are already invested in this channel and are going to be here for, see the growth, watch. You guys are going to see fast growth in terms of equipment and quality of videos.
Nobody is out here doing it like us, I've got the $300 Shure mics. I've got the $5,000 cinema camera. We're waiting on the $600 lens, okay?
Yeah.
Let's see what's about to happen next, okay?
Let's go.
If it's not the goo, it's got to go. Peace.
Ooh, is that indigo?